It was in 78. I got a phone call from Carol Dennis, and she had mentioned to me that Bob had let go of one or two of his background singers, and he was on his way to Nashville, and he was getting ready to do a show at the Municipal Auditorium. He was looking for singers. And when she said, "Are you interested in singing with Bob Dylan?" the first thing out of my mouth was, "Who is that?" She said, "Bob Dylan." I said, "I don't know him." And she said, "Blowing in the Wind, Lay Lady Lay." I said, "Oh yeah." I knew his music. I didn't know him. I went to the Holiday Inn on Broadway in Nashville, Tennessee, and I took a keyboard player, a guy by the name of Edward Jenkins, and I took him with me, and I went to this suite, and there was a piano in there, and all of a sudden, Carol said, "Just sing." So I looked around, I had my son sitting there, I sung Everything Must Change, and I finished singing it, and I looked around, and in the room was Carol, my son, Edward Jenkins, and there was a man sitting off in the corner on the side of a bed, and when I finished singing Everything Must Change, he had a hoodie on and some dark glasses. He had a pair of black leather pants and a white shirt on, and he took the glasses and he did like this over the glasses and put the glasses back up. And then she said, "Sing something else." And I sung Precious Lord, Take My Hand. And when I finished singing that, he took the glasses from here and brought them down like this and was looking at me over the top rim of the glasses. And I kept looking over at him. And then she said, "Sing something else." And I sung Amazing Grace. And when I sung Amazing Grace, I looked at her and I said, "Harmonize with me." And as we began to sing, he jumped up off of the bed and he said, "That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm looking for." And he jumped up and grabbed this big boom box and set it on the counter and took a cassette tape and put the cassette tape in the boom box. He said, "That's what I want." I looked at her. I said, "Who is that?" I said, "He's over there staring, and now he's talking about that's what he wants. Who is that?" And she said, "That's Bob Dylan." I said, "Well, why is he sitting over there in the dark like that?" And she said, "That's just how he is." I said, okay. So we began to sing Amazing Grace, and he got excited. He started scratching his hair and walking around, and we sung it, and he said, "Sing it again," and we sung it again. And he had tears in his eyes, and it started streaming down his face. He said, "That's what I want. That's the sound I'm looking for." And then he looked at me and he said, "You got the job." I said, "Thank you." And then he said, "You got to get your hair braided." I said, "Are you paying for it?" And he said, "Yeah, okay, I'll pay for it." And then I said, "Well, I'll get my hair braided." And then he said, "And you got to come to my show." And I said, "Okay." He said, "How many tickets you need?" At that time, I was married. I said, "Me, my son, my husband, my mama, my daddy." I said, "About 17 tickets." And his bodyguard said, 17? And I said, "Yeah, I got a big family." And he said, "Okay, give her 17 tickets." So we came to the show. And at the end of the show at the Municipal Auditorium, he turns around, and my mama walked up to Bob Dylan and she said, "Come here, baby, let me ask you a question." And Bob Dylan said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "What were you saying?" I couldn't understand one damn word that came out your mouth. I couldn't understand nothing. And he started laughing. And in my mind, I was like, "Oh, she done got me fired before I even went on the road." And he grabbed her and he hugged her. And my dad said, "Y'all go on." And so everybody left. And my dad looked at Bob Dylan and said, "So you're taking my little girl on the road with you?" And Bob Dylan said, "Yes, sir." And my dad put his hand out. And Bob put his hand in my dad's hand, and my dad ever so gently pulled Bob all the way in until they were like face to face like this. And my dad looked at him and said, "Don't make her cry." And Bob said, I promise. And that started me being on the road with him.
If I turn myself off, so I can't hear you cry.
Regina toured with him, but we had the opportunity to share the stage with him. Yeah, because we recorded Blowing in the Wind on our first CD.
And the crazy thing was, when we decided we were going to put Blowing in the Wind on our first CD, I called Bob and I said, we're going to record Blowing in the Wind, but I want you to hear our version of it. And so he came to Nashville, and I took it over to him, and I said, listen, tell me what you think. And he listened to it, and then he said, yeah, that's got dirt on it. And I said, is that good or bad? He said, no, it's good. He said, everybody is recording songs, and all their songs are like concrete. It just hit. This got dirt on it. It's soil. It goes into the body and it penetrates. And I was like, great, I'm going to make sure I tell my sisters. I said, are you going to do Blowing in the Wind? And he said, yeah. I said, well, you need to let me and my sisters come up and sing with you. He allowed us to come up on stage, and we sung Blowing in the Wind with him. And he looked at us and he was like, y'all sounded so good, I just wanted to shut up and let y'all sing it.
And I hear the words that you say in your sleep.
I've written 3 songs with Bob Dylan, and that's a blessing, because there have been a lot of people to tell me, oh, well, he don't let nobody write with him. Well, the first song I wrote is on our first CD. It's called Got to Give Him My All. And I was on the road with him, and I was pacing up and down the hall of the bus, and he looked at me and he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm trying to write my first song, and I don't know where to go from here. And he said, let me look at it. And I gave it to him, and he said, oh, and he flipped the page, and he started writing. And then when he stopped, he gave it back to me. I said, what is this? He said, it's the bridge to the song. And I said, oh, I didn't even know what a bridge was, honestly. So we went in the studio and recorded. And then I wrote the song, Don't Make Her Cry, based on what my father said to him the first night my dad met him and looked at him and said, don't make her cry. It took us some years to finally do that one. When they were looking for Bob Dylan to give him the Nobel Peace Prize, he was in Huntsville, Alabama. And I drove to Huntsville, Alabama, and I had written out all these lyrics. Bob Dylan songs got 15 verses or so. So I written out all these lyrics, and I said, okay, look at what I wrote, scratch out what don't make sense, and put in what does. And he looked and he said, you're all over the place. I said, I know, I need help. So he looked at it and he wrote. He was telling me to write. I said, no, I want it in your handwriting. So he scratched out lines and put in the line he thought would work. And we had the song, Don't Make Her Cry. The last one I wrote with him, I tattooed it because I think this is going to be the greatest one of all, and it has not been recorded, and it's called I Am. It's based on one night I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard a conversation, and it was like God and Mother Nature talking about the world and how mankind is treating the world. I wrote everything that I remembered, and then I took it to him and I said, add to it, and he did. And I haven't recorded it or put music to it yet.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the McCrary Sisters.